Today, I want you to imagine the following thought experiment. Imagine if 90% of the world's population decided that they did not want AI in their society. So, if our society were truly democratic, or at least free to decide things, or if our society had the autonomy to really choose what's best or what most people want at least, then AI could be eradicated. But the problem is that it wouldn't be because 10% of the population would still use it and would gain an advantage over the other 90%. And in that case, other people would essentially be pressured or forced to use it anyway because of its ability to provide a great advantage to that minority. Because AI doesn't really provide any true benefit to life, it sort of creates this pure prisoner's dilemma situation where people are pressured to use it, and pretty much businesses and all entities are pressured to use it because it does provide that speed and efficiency advantage, even though it doesn't necessarily lead to any real benefit to life. Now, this prisoner's dilemma situation, combined with the fact that in most domains of technology, when technology reaches a sort of state of diminishing returns, when further development no longer leads to true improvements for the majority, technology begins to develop itself autonomously, even though that development may go against the needs of human beings. So, this brings me to discuss the longer term goals of technology and how it's sort of progressing. So, the main emergent phenomena that arises when technology becomes sufficiently advanced is that it becomes relatively autonomous. If you look at the world today, there are very few technologies that can be sort of stopped if we wanted to stop them. People just develop technology, and it seems to be a kind of default mode of operation for human beings to do so. We're sort of locked in developing technology. And as technology becomes more advanced, this sort of development of technology, this autonomy of technology becomes stronger. So the level of sophistication of technology is kind of proportional to its ability to become autonomous, especially in a society where sort of social norms have themselves been modified by technology so that we don't question the technology. We don't really question its utility anymore. You know, I think back in the day, technology really did make, at least, if not life better, life more comfortable in some ways. And we're still in that sort of mode of operation. We don't question it anymore. Now, some societies like the Amish, they do question technology, and they do consider technology on a case-by-case basis. So they realize that technology, beyond its immediate function, has a tendency in the long term to modify society. And this modification can lead to undesirable situations that sort of destroy earlier social norms that may be precious or useful to people. But in a society like ours where we don't question that, where the default mode of operation is to introduce the technology first and then allow people to decide on an individual basis whether to use it, will lead to a situation where technology becomes autonomous. And this is not a very healthy situation, because people just choose on an individual basis, and we think that's freedom, but it's not really freedom because it usually leads to a global situation where technology becomes entrenched. For example, I repeat this example a lot, the example of the smartphone. Now, it's very difficult in the modern world to get by without a phone. If you want a bank account, most banks rather, they do require some form of two-factor authentication. And I think in some countries, for example, Brazil, I lived in Brazil for 2 years, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get by there without WhatsApp because every business, every organization, or almost every organization defaults to using WhatsApp as their primary means of communication. Yes, some businesses do advertise an email, but good luck getting your email answered. You might as well just use WhatsApp. So in that case, people are essentially forced to use a smartphone if they want to integrate in society. This phenomenon of technology being sort of made necessary is kind of unusual. It's kind of recent. Now, that's not true of many technologies. For example, refrigeration. Although most people like refrigeration or having a refrigerator, It's very easy to live without a refrigerator. I lived without a refrigerator for 2 years, and it barely makes a difference in the functioning of everyday life. Now, it does add some convenience, of course, but it's absolutely non essential. That's very different with telecommunications technologies. Telecommunications technologies modify the way we communicate and therefore make themselves sort of necessary. And this isn't due to any conscious sort of design choice, at least not in the short term. When smartphones were first released, when mobile phones became widespread, no one said you have to use one. They just make life more convenient. But over time, they became entrenched, modified our social norms, and became a technology which is unfortunately necessary. Personally, I would love to never use a smartphone again. I actually hate phones, but again, because my bank kind of requires one, I have one. So that's the downside there. Now, I want to go back. I kind of got lost on a tangent, but I want to go back to discuss the autonomy of technology and how the autonomy of technology is proportional to its sophistication. But actually, you can break down the process by which technology becomes autonomous into two sort of subcategories, which are important to understand if we want to handle technology more responsibly in our society. So, in order for technology to become autonomous and make itself a priority over the needs of human beings and biological life, it needs to accomplish two tasks, basically. Two tasks. The first task is the sort of removal of our physical autonomy and our physical independence. It does this by removing us from our land bases, removing us from land in which we can grow food, and it makes us more dependent on it. We become used to relying on physical technology to sort of live, survive, and be comfortable. But the more we build up that sort of infrastructure, the less we are reliant on ourselves. So over time, we gradually lose our physical autonomy. We become soft. We become incapable of survival in the wild. We don't know how to identify wild plants. We don't know much about growing food. Even when people do grow food in modern culture, it's usually a hobby, and it comes from going to the garden store and buying soil in plastic bags. Okay, that's not real autonomy. That's just some kind of hobby that is reliant on a bunch of different industrial machinery. Although individual technologies can theoretically make us more powerful, over time, paradoxically, building up the infrastructure of technology makes us less reliant on ourselves, more reliant on technology. It's important to understand this process not as a sort of linear progression in one dimension. This is a highly multi-dimensional phenomena. One dimension might be reliant on metal, physical tools. Another dimension might be the modification of the social structure. Another dimension might be the modification of the physical topology of cities so that we can no longer access these lands. So multiple dimensions work in different ways. Technology might actually help us in the short term to become more autonomous in one dimension. But if you look at the overall progression in this highly multidimensional space, the overall distance from autonomy increases. In other words, we become less autonomous, even though in some dimensions we become more autonomous. So basically, the first step that technology has to accomplish in order to make us subservient to it is to reduce our physical autonomy. The second step is a little more insidious and a little more scary. It's the step to remove our mental autonomy. And this step has just basically started. It's a young step. It started with computers, but it kind of only really began properly when people started to invent very sophisticated artificial intelligence. So AI, I talk about AI a lot, and I talk about some of the dangers of AI. For example, the danger that it can take away people's jobs, the danger that it can sort of reduce the value of art, all of those things. But all of those things that I've talked about sort of fall under this umbrella of removing our mental autonomy. See, technology removes our physical autonomy by making us very dependent on its physical construction. And AI is the first step to remove our mental autonomy. Now, this removal of our mental autonomy means that we will no longer make as many important decisions. AI can now sort of communicate for us and augment our communication make decisions. And this is very insidious because each individual step seems like it could be an improvement. I mean, lots of people like the idea that AI can now help us in our medical matters, diagnose diseases and all that stuff, write our emails for us and save us time. But over time, all of these steps reduce our mental strength, reduce our psychological strength in order to function in the world. This mental dependence and this reduction of our mental capabilities to rely on ourselves mentally, to rely on our own intellect, to process information and to survive in the world is the second step. And once technology accomplishes these two steps, then we'll become pretty much completely subservient to technology. There's really no direction we can go. If we decide that we don't want a world in which technology keeps growing, then we can't change it because our entire world has been sort of modified and constructed in a way so that the only direction we can go is the innovation of technology. And that's a very bad thing because if something turns out to be not very healthy for us, like AI, we can no longer decide to stop it. We can't stop it basically because of those sort of series of prisoner dilemma situations, which kind of move in one way. It's like a fish hook. It goes into the fish, but because of its design, it can't come out of the fish. So this is the main reason why AI is so dangerous. It's dangerous because it is a powerful tool to remove that mental and intellectual autonomy that we have. And really, so this means that if we want to sort of maintain our sanity as a society, we can't keep using AI. Now, I don't really have a lot of hope that anyone is going to stop because all of these processes that I've described have already rendered us fairly incapable of being autonomous. Now, this is going to have serious repercussions because technology in general, although it provides short-term benefits, is essentially an unsustainable phenomenon. It's an unsustainable phenomenon because it requires energy, it requires mining. Now, I read the other day that mainstream environmentalists are really pushing hard for solar power, and they're celebrating that they're adding gigawatts of power to the electricity grid, but at the same time, technology comes right in to take that energy. Most big tech organizations are building data centers, AI data centers, and AI, whatever they're doing with AI, that are going to require hundreds of gigawatts of power. Just like the car, no one could have really expected that building a car would eventually result in an entire society dependent on fossil fuel cars. And even when cars are replaced by electric vehicles, we're still going to use more energy in other ways, and many places are not going to switch over to solar power right away. And cheap energy, again, means more technological development. And that technological development, even though it may not use fossil fuels as much, because fossil fuels will eventually be replaced, right? They're going to be phased out just because they're going to be more expensive and they're going to be replaced by other sources of power. But still, all of this new technology that develops is still physical. All of this new technology is still going to require mining. It's still going to require habitat destruction. And advances in technology will eventually mean the expansion of more populations and more competition. So if we insist on developing technology and continuing down this path of innovation, the plans of mainstream environmentalists aren't going to help us. Replacing fossil fuels with solar power might sort of slow down the process a little bit, but it's still going to mean more production of plastic, more production of technology, more mining, more habitat destruction. So this path of technological development is absolutely unsustainable. And the degree to which we are locked into this path of destruction is dependent on these two steps that I described. And the second step is currently underway. So basically, technology is now sort of in the rapid process. So the result is going to be absolute destruction. So really, the only way out of this sort of path to destruction is the cessation of the development on AI. It's the restriction on very advanced technologies. Basically, we have to develop a wisdom to recognize when technologies go past their point of diminishing returns, somewhat like the Amish, but probably without the religious stuff. We need to recognize how to stop and how to restructure our society in order to live a more sustainable life that isn't centered around technological innovation. Because if we continue down this path, once these two steps are sort of locked in, we will be essentially like animals in a zoo. And maybe that's karma because we lock animals in zoos, but basically We will be like animals in zoos. We will have no autonomy. Our only choice will be to apply our intelligence to develop more technologies. We will be very narrow domain thinkers with no wisdom. And it will essentially not be life anymore. It will be just cogs in a machine. So that's the end game right here. That's the end game for technology. That's the objective of technology. It's an emergent objective that's not necessarily dependent on a true conscious entity, but it is an emergent objective. It's an emergent phenomenon of technology to act as if it had the objective to completely make all biological life subservient to it. So this is a very dangerous thing. I know a lot of people will just ignore this and go back to their daily lives and just hope this goes away. And probably for a lot of people, it is going to go away. And that's part of the problem, because most people that do have the power to change anything are probably too old or too rich to really suffer the consequences that are really going to manifest themselves in 50 to 100 years. So this is a big problem. It's a big problem for biological life. And I hope one day we can find the courage within ourselves to do something about it. And if not, well, at least, well, I guess I can't say anything, right? Because I don't know. I don't know if there even is an at least at this point, but I do think that we do need to do something about it. We need to eradicate AI. We need to take back our own autonomy a little bit. Not give up tools entirely, because we are tool users, but we do need to place restrictions on our tool use because it has gotten completely out of control. So I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you again next time.